Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we have been given another opportunity to meet on the air in the program Man and Nature. And today's discussion, we will continue with our focus on ways to manage disasters. Just to recap, our guest last week, Dr. Wan Nurul Mardiyah binti Wan Muhammad Rani, who is Deputy Director 2, Institute Sultan Iskandar, University of Technology Malaysia or UTM, spoke on the topic challenges of fostering risk-informed urban development. Among other things, Dr. Nurul explained the concept of risk-informed urban development, which is an innovative approach in risk-based decision-making process based on increased understanding of risks as well as evidence-based planning. Today, in this week's episode of Man and Nature, Alhamdulillah, we have with us Yang Berbahagia Datuk Zakaria Muhammad, who is Chairman of the Board of Geologists Malaysia. He is also Adjunct Professor and Research Fellow at the Disaster Preparedness and Preventive Centre, DPPC, Malaysia-Japan International Institute of Technology, MJIIT, at UTM. Yang Bahagia Datuk Zakaria is a renowned expert on geological mapping, landslides, and disaster management. Inshallah, today we will discuss the topic geological hazard, landslide, and disaster risk reduction with Yang Bahagia Datuk Zakaria. Assalamualaikum and welcome, Datuk.
Waalaikumsalam. Alhamdulillah. Yeah. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Yes.
Thank you, Datuk, for being able to join me on Man and Nature. And perhaps to begin our discussion, as I mentioned earlier in the introduction, Yang Bahagia Datuk Zakaria is the chairman of the Board of Geologists. For the benefit of our listeners, perhaps you can start by telling us about the Board of Geologists.
Assalamualaikum and salam sejahtera to all audience, ladies and gentlemen. In my capacity as a chairman of the Board of Geologists, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce about the Board of Geologists before we discuss further about the topic today. Lembaga Ahli Geologi Malaysia or the Board of Geologists or BOG was established as a body corporate constitute under the Geologists Act 2008 formed in 2014. The Geologists Act requires the registration of individuals engaged in the practice of geology having an impact upon public health, safety, and welfare as defined by the law. The board is responsible for the enforcement of the Geologists Act 2008 and regulating the professional conduct and practice of registered geologists in order to safeguard and safety and interest of the public. The function of the board as a provider under the section 441 of the Acts, among others, to determine and regulate the professional conduct and activity of the geological profession, to represent the geological profession in any matter in which it may be necessary or expedient to do so, and to appoint person to represent geological profession in the opinion of the board represent the geological profession, and to ensure the development program for registered geologists to further enhance their knowledge in the latest development related to geologist profession. Under the section 14, which is restriction on non-registered professional geologists, this is very important. No person can practice or take up employment as a geologist or display any sign implying be entitled to describe himself as professional geologist. This person can be liable to fine not exceeding 10,000 ringgit or 2 imprisonment for a term not exceeding 1 year or to both. Same goes to employment for unregistered person. For your information, the board is now in their 9 years of their existence as a regulatory body. The board, by the end of December 2022, registered 1,610 geologists, comprising 1,020 registered professional geologists, 1,001 registered foreign geologists, and 484 registered graduate geologists. Back to you, Doctor.
Thank you, Datuk, for the information on Board of Geology. So basically, we understand that geology is a profession that is regulated by the law, and also governed by the Board of Geology. Now, Dato, could you enlighten our listeners, going back to our topic, could you enlighten our listeners about geological hazard, especially hazard related to recent cascading landslide disaster in Malaysia, as well as its potential regional impact on local communities and critical infrastructure such as our road networks, our water supply system, etc.?
Geological hazard is a hazard that's related to geological processes, such as we all know, earthquake, tsunami, volcanic eruption, landslide, liquefaction, and land subsidence that is prominently related to geological processes on the Earth. Especially landslide, earthquake, and tsunami are geological hazards that contribute to the higher economic loss and number of casualty or fatality. Economic loss and casualty due to landslide disaster is reported sometimes under category typhoon disaster or sometimes under earthquake disaster, depend on triggering events. If we revisit landslide disaster for the last few years, give alarming situation. For example, in August 2021, Gunung Jura landslide and debris flow disaster affected thousands of houses and million ringgit of losses. Similarly, on the 19th December 2031, the debris flood and debris flow disaster in Ulu Langat and Sungai Telemon, Bentong, Gunung Peris Negeri Sembilan, with the economic losses estimated 6 billion ringgit, Indonesia ringgit, and affected 160,000 people. The number of the past disaster gives us a clear signal that there are emerging geological hazards, which I call it high elevation landslide hazard, or we call it landslide in the mountainous region. Generally, mountainous landslide hazards are triggered by the earthquake shaking or prolonged or an extreme high elevation rain, or combination of both, triggering factors such as earthquake shaking, loosening body of rock and soil mass in the mountainous region, and extreme and prolonged higher elevation rainfall to reduce the strength and mass of body of earth. The mechanic of landslide disaster happening in 2015 in Mount Kinabalu, if you remember, triggered by the combination of earthquake and prolonged rainfall. That is a very good example. Triggering factor contribute to the high elevation landslide. Even in terms of what is made different, and very important, we look at this because this event, I call it a mountainous landslide. Usually it happens in high elevation and in the area 600 meters and above 1,000 meters, whereby a cluster of landslide, numbers of landslide, some more than 100 of landslide within the catchment, bring down millions of tons of earth, soil, and rock together with the trees to the downstream, affected all infrastructure along the pathway and also resident area. These are the very, we call it new emerging hazard. We have seen the chain of Earth's surface landscape morphology due to this dynamic of nature geological process. Mountainous landslide is emerging hazard that need to be understood the risk. And I think research and monitoring should be intensified in order to understand the future risk to the community and environment. We should learn from the past disaster to understand future risks. Back to you, Doctor. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Megadato.
Yeah.
Perhaps you would like to share with us now your view regarding initiatives to reduce risk of landslide disaster, especially the one that you mentioned, high elevation landslide hazard in Malaysia in particular, in view of things happening today like climate change, which is definitely affecting our climate and also weather, increased rainfall, which also affects which also causes landslide, as you mentioned. Perhaps some examples would help to illustrate this issue, Dato'?
There are possibility an area in the highland and mountainous region exposed to extreme or prolonged rainfall, and also a squid, for instance, in Sabah, that
Yeah.
may trigger a medium or large-scale landslide in the upstream of the river basin. We have seen the scientific evidence of the disaster related to mountainous landslides, such as 2015 Messi Rockfall and the reflow in Mount Kinabalu, and also, which I did mention just now, what happening in state of Ulu Langat and Telemon. So the large-scale disaster change morphology of river basin and the landscape. In order to look at the DRI initiative, usually we follow two very important global initiatives. First, Sugar Framework of Action, which is begin in the year of 2015, and follow with the Sender Framework of Action, DRI of Action 2014 and 2030. At the early days, our focus on DRI using a general solution and land use planning. That is the first part. And secondly, we shift from combination of engineering solution, land use planning, incorporating information about the hazard, and also we also have what they call awareness or developing capacity of the targeted group to face the disasters. So, for your information, Sender Framework Priority for Action to Reduce Risk spell out 4 key actions. First, understanding of risk. Under this program, Department of Mineral and Geoscience have done hazard risk mapping of a hotspot area, and for instance, in Klang Valley, in Kundasan, and others area. And also, Public Works Department have done hazard and risk assessment along major highways and roads in order to know high hazard area, and subsequently action be taken to remedy or to improve the stability of the slope, and also to monitor those high risk slope. That's two common practice have been done before. At the same time, there is an initiative to rebuild again those disaster area, meaning that those areas have been gone through disaster. There's a planning to redevelop that area using integrated approach, taking consideration hazard and risk information, and also reviewing all the development planning for that particular area. Back to you, Doctor.
Okay, thank you, Dato'.
Yeah.
What would be your recommendations towards reducing future risk of any geological disaster?
As I said, we have done a lot, but then if you look at the event, it keeps coming.
Yeah.
That's not surprise for us, because internationally, if you compare 20 years information and 20 years information before, there's increasing of the casualty, increasing of losses. That's understood because population growth, new development area encroaching those environmental sensitive area. Then the event with the climate change, climate vulnerability, extreme rainfall or prolonged rainfall that triggered landslide, meaning that exposure to the hazard is increasing. That statistic is not new; it's a very common knowledge. With that, considering geological disasters, such as landslide and debris flow, which I mentioned just now, in mountainous area. This is a new. It's not new, but then internal frequency is increasing. Occur more than 25 times this country since 1995, and claim 442 lives. That's exclude the recent event in Batakali. This is the most dangerous natural disaster and often misinterpreted because the manifestation or impact is often associated with the phenomena of waterhead or kepala air, we know it, and a flash flood, which is different. This is not a flash flood. This is a debris flow, bring down millions of tons of earth and dirt and rock and trees along the way. So geomorphological process in a basin can cause geological disaster, especially in high elevation scale landslide and debris flow. And the landslide and debris flow disaster occur in highland valley, and the impact occur in the lowland area and downstream. 5 key recommendation to reducing future risk geological disaster that generate from the mountainous hazard. First, we should enhance our understanding of current and future risks of mountainous area, collecting and harnessing a multi-dimensional field data for assessing cascading hazard and systematic risk at the local scale, establish a national debris flow disaster risk sub-basin mapping program. So we should carry out that after we look back at the last few years event in terms of frequency. And in order to continuously mapping to predict the risk of the future disaster and detail study high risk sub-basin area. A fourth is enhance geological disaster early warning system network in mountainous area related to geological disaster. That include the early warning system network is managed by specific agency, which is have a multidisciplinary group. And I would like to highlight another few recommendations. Geological disaster risk mitigation based on multifunctional integrated structure and eco-friendly mitigation also needed. And one important component which we have been doing before, integrated river basin management, IRBN, is fully empowered by the introducing an additional geological disaster management policy and action in the river basin management and national recreational part management for community safety. This is new. I think we should add in a disaster component in that under integrated river basin management. And also we should aligning local DRR resilient strategy with the national slope master plan. Within the National Slope Master Plan, there's a detailed action need to be taken by various agencies, very well coordinated. And also, lastly, I suggest we should establish, this is a timely to establish a National Geological Disaster Research Center so that those geological disaster information reference center and emerging geological disaster can be well kept and disseminated to the right people. Of course, conducting forensic study of geological disaster also very important. Understanding the past event is a key for future reducing future risk. Back to you, Doctor.
Right, thank you, Dato. Interesting. You mentioned about your suggestion, the last one on the formation of National Geological Disaster Research Center. I think that's very critical. Something
Yeah.
that needs to be looked at. Dato, just out of curiosity, because you mentioned
Yeah.
earlier in your previous answer, you mentioned about the recent Batang Kali incident. What,
Yes, yeah.
if I may know, what are your thoughts on that tragedy?
I should not comment on that because the committee is working on that. It's not fair to them. But what I would say is that kind of landslide is happening several places before. No, that is I would say that is single landslide.
I
Which
see.
one I am talking just now? Mountainous landslide is many landslides within certain area bring down ton of material. So that's a different kind of hazard which I'm
I
talking
see.
just now. Okay,
Okay.
Doctor.
Okay. Thank you,
Yeah.
Dato'.
Yeah.
Before we end, Dato', would you like to give some concluding remarks to our discussion on our topic today, geological hazard, landslide, and disaster risk reduction?
I think lesson learned from disaster is very important for us. We should benefit what happened, understanding of that the disaster for future generation and
Mm.
safety of future generation. That's the key point.
Right.
Yes, that's all. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dato'. Thank you for joining us this afternoon in Men and Nature. I believe your explanation and also some of the suggestions that you put forward are very interesting and very informative, especially to our listeners. But before we end, I would like to quote the translation from verse 31 of Surah Al-Anbiya, because Dato mentioned about mountains,
Yeah.
high elevation landslide hazard. Now it's interesting that in the Quran, in verse 31 of Surah Al-Anbiya, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the effect that, and we have set on the earth mountains standing firm, lest it should shake with them, and we have made therein broad highways between mountains for them to pass through, that they may receive guidance. Now, in essence, this verse is one of the many verses in the Quran that reminds us that everything that Allah has created, including mountains, has a role or function. However, if we as the Khalifa on the planet continuously to not carry out our responsibility in the way that Allah wants us to, then at the end of the day, it is us who will have to deal with the calamities and also the disasters, such as in our discussion today, landslides. Now, with that food for thought, I'd like to record my sincerest gratitude to Yang Bahagia Datuk Zakaria Muhammad, Chairman of the Board of Geologists Malaysia, for sharing his views in Man and Nature this week. This program can be heard either on Radio IKIM or IKIM FM's Facebook page. Please share and forward this discussion with everyone so that its benefits can be more widespread. Inshallah, I would like to again express my thanks to Yang Bagi Datuk for coming on this program this week. We would love to have you again in the future to discuss further similar topics, inshallah. That's all the time that we have for this week's edition of Men and Nature. Next week, we will continue with our discussion on managing disasters, but from another dimension with another special guest. To find out more, stay tuned to Men and Nature, same time next week. Until next time, wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.